Michael Chin had always considered himself one of the luckiest men alive. At 42 years old, he had built what seemed like the perfect American life, a successful career as a senior architect at one of San Francisco's most prestigious firms, a beautiful wife named Jennifer who had been his college sweetheart, 3 healthy children, and a best friend, David Martinez, who had been by his side through every major milestone since they were 12 years old. The friendship between Michael and David was a kind that people envied, a brotherhood forged in childhood and strengthened through decades of shared experiences. They had played on the same little league team, attended the same high school, been each other's best man at their weddings, and served as godfathers to each other's children. David lived just 4 blocks away from Michael's family, and their homes served as extensions of each other, with children, spouses, and friends flowing freely between the 2 households. Michael had met Jennifer during their junior year at UC Berkeley, and David had been there for their first date, their engagement, and every anniversary celebration since. When Michael proposed, David had helped him pick out the ring. When their first child, Emma, was born 8 years ago, David had been in the hospital waiting room, pacing alongside Michael's parents. When their twins, Lucas and Sophia, were born 4 years later, David had been the first person Michael called with the news. The 3 adults had created what felt like an extended family unit that enriched all their lives. Jennifer and David got along wonderfully, sharing similar senses of humor and interests in hiking and photography that Michael didn't particularly enjoy. David's own marriage to his wife Lisa had ended in an amicable divorce 3 years earlier, but had remained close to Michael and Jennifer's family, often joined them for dinners, vacations, and holiday celebrations. If Michael had any concerns about his life, they were minor ones that seemed almost petty in the context of his overall good fortune. Jennifer sometimes seemed distant or preoccupied, but he attributed that to the stresses of managing a household with 3 young children while working part-time as a freelance graphic designer. David occasionally made comment about Michael's work schedule or parenting decisions that felt slightly critical, but Michael assumed that was just a natural result of a long-time friendship where people felt comfortable speaking honestly with each other. The discovery that would destroy Michael's understanding of his own life came on a Tuesday evening in October 2023. In the most mundane way possible. Michael had been working late in his home office, preparing a presentation for a major client meeting, when his laptop suddenly crashed due to a software update that hadn't installed properly. Desperate to retrieve his files and meet his deadline, he remembered that Jennifer sometimes used a desktop computer in their shared office space for her graphic design work, and she might have backed up some of his documents on that machine. Michael had always been meticulous about organizing his digital files, and he knew exactly where to look for his work documents on the shared computer. But when he opened the file directory he was looking for, he noticed a folder he had never seen before, labeled simply D&J and hidden in a subfolder that wasn't immediately visible unless you knew how to navigate to it. Curiosity overruled his usual respect for Jennifer's privacy, especially since the folder was on a computer that they technically shared, even though Jennifer was a primary user. Michael assumed it might contain collaborative projects that Jennifer was working on with a client whose name started with D, or perhaps photos from a recent family trip that she had organized with David's help. The first file he opened was a photograph, and it took Michael's brain several seconds to process what he was seeing. It was a picture of Jennifer and David, but they weren't in a casual, friendly pose. They were embracing intimately, kissing with the kind of passion that Michael recognized from the early days of his relationship with Jennifer when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Michael stared at the image, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe it was an old photo from before Jennifer and Michael had started dating seriously? Maybe it was some kind of joke or dare from a party where people had been drinking. But as he looked more closely at the image, he could see details that made innocent explanations impossible. Jennifer was wearing her wedding ring. Her hair was styled the way she had been wearing it for the past 2 years, and in the background, he could make out the distinctive tiles of David's kitchen, which had been remodeled just 18 months ago. With hands that were beginning to shake, Michael opened the next file. It was another photograph of Jennifer and David, this one taken outdoors in what appeared to be a secluded area of Golden Gate Park. They were lying on a blanket together, Jennifer's head resting on David's chest, both of them looking relaxed and intimate in a way that spoke of comfort and familiarity rather than a spontaneous moment of poor judgment. If this story truly touches your heart, let it speak for you. like this video, subscribe to be part of our journey, and share your feelings in the comments. The third file was a document that made Michael's blood run cold, a letter written in Jennifer's handwriting, addressed to my dearest David, and dated just 6 months earlier. Michael read the letter with growing horror as Jennifer described her love for David, her guilt about deceiving Michael, and her fantasies about a future where they could be together openly. "I know we agreed that we can't keep doing this forever," Jennifer had written, "but I can't imagine my life without you. When I'm with Michael, I feel like I'm playing a role in someone else's life. When I'm with you, I feel like myself. I wish we could find a way to be together without destroying everyone we care about, but I'm starting to think that might be impossible." Michael's hands were trembling so violently that he could barely navigate the computer mouse, but he forced himself to continue exploring the folder. What he found over the next hour was a comprehensive documentation of a relationship that had apparently been going on for years. Hundreds of photographs spanning different seasons and locations, love letters that referenced shared memories and inside jokes, and even videos that Michael couldn't bring himself to watch. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the folder was a subfolder labeled Important Documents. Inside were digital copies of birth certificates for Lucas and Sophia, Michael's 4-year-old twins. But these weren't the versions that Michael had in his own files. These versions listed David Martinez as a father. Michael stared at the birth certificates, his mind struggling to process the implications. Lucas and Sophia, the children he had been present for at their births, the children he had held in his arms minutes after they entered the world, the children who called him daddy and looked to him for everything from bedtime stories to help with homework. According to these documents, they weren't his biological children at all. The room seemed to spin around Michael as he tried to understand what he was looking at. How could David be listed as the father on birth certificates for children who had been born during Michael's marriage to Jennifer? How could Jennifer have managed to create false documentation? And most importantly, how could he have been deceived about something so fundamental for 4 years? Michael spent the next 3 hours in his office chair, methodically going through every file in a hidden folder, piecing together a timeline of betrayal that was far more extensive and calculated than he could have imagined. The earliest photographs in the collection dated back nearly 10 years, to a time when Michael had been working especially long hours to establish himself at his architecture firm. The affair had apparently begun during a period when Jennifer and David had been spending time together, while Michael was traveling for work, and it had continued consistently for the entire decade since. The documentation in the folder told a story of elaborate deception that had required coordination, planning, and constant lies from both Jennifer and David. There were receipts for hotel rooms during weekends when Jennifer had told Michael she was visiting her sister in Los Angeles. There were text message screenshots discussing alibis and cover stories for times when they wanted to be together. There were even photos of Jennifer and David at restaurants and events that Michael recognized, occasions where Jennifer had told him she was going alone or with female friends. But the most painful discovery was a series of letters that Jennifer and David had written to each other discussing Michael himself. They referred to him as M in their correspondence, and their comments revealed a level of contempt and manipulation that Michael had never suspected. David wrote about how M is so focused on work that he doesn't pay attention to what's happening in his own house. Jennifer responded with observations about how M is so trusting that he believes everything we tell him without question. The letters also revealed that Jennifer and David had discussed the possibility of ending their respective marriages to be together, but had decided that the financial and social costs would be too high. They had apparently chosen to continue their double lives indefinitely, with Jennifer remaining married to Michael for financial security and stability, while maintaining her emotional and physical relationship with David. The most heartbreaking aspect of the correspondence was a discussion of the children. Jennifer and David wrote openly about their belief that Lucas and Sophia were David's biological children, and they discussed the challenges of hiding this fact from Michael while still allowing David to be involved in the children's lives as their uncle. They had even planned activities and outings specifically designed to give David time with his children while maintaining the pretense that he was simply being a good family friend. As the sun began to rise on what would become the worst day of Michael's life, he sat in his office chair surrounded by printouts of the evidence he had discovered, trying to figure out what to do with information that had destroyed his understanding of his own existence. Everything he had believed about his marriage, his family, and his closest friendship had been revealed to be an elaborate lie maintained by the two people he trusted most in the world. The immediate practical question seemed overwhelming. Should he confront Jennifer and David immediately? Should he consult with a divorce attorney before saying anything? Should he demand paternity tests for all 3 children to determine which ones were actually his biological offspring? Should he call Jennifer's sister to verify the trips that had provided cover for the affair? Should he notify David's ex-wife Lisa, who might have been deceived about the reason for David's divorce? But beneath the practical questions was an emotional devastation that Michael had never experienced before. The betrayal wasn't just about adultery. It was about the systematic theft of his reality by people who had pretended to love him while secretly mocking his trust and manipulating his life for their own purposes. Michael realized that he couldn't remember the last time he had been alone with Jennifer without David being involved in their plan somehow. David had been present at family dinners, birthday parties, school events, and even intimate family vacations. He had helped Michael make decisions about the children's schools, activities, and medical care. He had been consulted about major purchases, career decisions, and family planning. In retrospect, Michael could see that David had been living as a shadow father and husband, enjoying the benefits of family life without any of the legal or financial responsibilities. The betrayal was so complete that Michael began to question his memory of events, wondering whether signs of the affair had been obvious all along, and he had simply been too trusting or too busy to notice them. Had Jennifer and David been flirting openly in front of him? Had their children ever made innocent comments that should have alerted him to the truth? Had friends or family members suspected something and chosen not to tell him? As Tuesday morning progressed, Michael called in sick to work, the first time he'd used a sick day in over 3 years, and sat in his office trying to process the evidence he had discovered. He found himself analyzing photographs of family gatherings with new eyes, noticing the way David and Jennifer positioned themselves near each other, the comfortable familiarity of their body language, and the way they seemed to communicate through glances and subtle gestures that Michael had previously interpreted as normal friendship. The most painful realization was that Michael's entire adult life had been built on a foundation of lies. His marriage, his children, his closest friendship, and even his understanding of himself as a husband and father were all based on false information that Jennifer and David had collaborated to maintain. He had been living in a reality show where he was the only person who didn't know it was all scripted. When Jennifer returned home that evening with Lucas and Sophia after picking them up from daycare, Michael watched her interact with the children with new awareness. Did Sophia's laugh sound like David's? Did Lucas have David's eyes? Had Jennifer been thinking about David when she had chosen the children's names? When she tucked them into bed each night and told them she loved them, was she thinking about their biological father who lived 4 blocks away? Jennifer seemed to sense that something was different about Michael's mood, but she attributed it to work stress and didn't press him for details. Michael realized that this was probably typical of their relationship. Jennifer had grown skilled at managing his emotions and deflecting his attention away from anything that might lead to uncomfortable questions. That night, as Jennifer slept beside him in their bed, Michael lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to move forward. He couldn't continue living with the knowledge he had gained without confronting the situation, but he also couldn't figure out how to have a conversation about a betrayal so extensive that it challenged everything he understood about the people he loved most. Michael spent the next day researching divorce attorneys, private investigators, and paternity testing procedures, trying to understand his legal and practical options. But he also found himself obsessing over details from the hidden folder, returning to reread letters and examine photographs for clues about the extent of the deception he had been living with. The breakthrough moment came when Michael realized that he needed to verify the information he had found before confronting Jennifer and David. The birth certificates that listed David as the father of the twins seemed impossible. How could Jennifer have managed to file false paternity information without Michael's knowledge? He decided to call the hospital where the twins had been born and request copies of the original documentation. The phone call to the hospital's record department revealed another layer of deception that Michael hadn't anticipated. According to the hospital's records, David Martinez was indeed listed as the father of Lucas and Sophia Chun, and Jennifer had apparently signed legal documents establishing paternity at the time of the births. Michael had been present for the births and had assumed that he was automatically listed as the father, because he was Jennifer's husband, but California law apparently required specific paternity documentation that Jennifer had handled without his involvement. The hospital record specialist explained that it was not uncommon for mothers to handle birth certificate paperwork independently, especially in cases where there were complications or unusual circumstances. Jennifer had apparently told the hospital staff that she and Michael were divorced but maintaining an amicable relationship, and that David was her new partner who would be assuming parental responsibilities. Michael had been listed in the hospital's records as Jennifer's birth coach rather than as the father of the children. This revelation meant that Michael had no legal parental rights to Lucas and Sophia, despite having raised them as his own children for 4 years. He was not eligible to make decisions about their medical care, education, or general welfare. In the event of a divorce, he would have no custody rights and no obligation to pay child support, but he also had no legal standing to maintain a relationship with children he had loved and cared for since birth. The legal implications of Jennifer's deception were staggering, but the emotional implications were even more devastating. Michael realized that Jennifer and David hadn't just been having an affair. They had been systematically stealing his parental relationship with children he had believed were his own, while simultaneously forcing him to provide financial support for David's biological offspring. Armed with this information, Michael finally felt ready to confront Jennifer and David about what he had discovered. But he also realized that the confrontation would effectively end his life as he had known it for the past 15 years. His marriage would be over, his friendship with David would be destroyed, his relationship with Lucas and Sophia would become legally complicated, and his understanding of himself as a man, husband, and father would require complete reconstruction. On Thursday evening, 3 days after his initial discovery, Michael arranged for Emma to spend the night at her friend's house and asked Jennifer if they could have dinner together after the twins went to bed. He had decided to confront Jennifer first, before involving David in the conversation, hoping that she might be willing to answer his questions honestly once she realized that her deception had been discovered. Jennifer seemed pleased that Michael was making an effort to spend focused time together, which made the approaching conversation even more painful for Michael. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of wine, and talked excitedly about plans for their upcoming wedding anniversary celebration. Michael realized that Jennifer had no idea that he had discovered the truth, and she was continuing to maintain the loving wife persona that had apparently been a performance for years. When they finally sat down to dinner, Michael placed printouts of several photographs and documents from the hidden folder on the table between them. He watched Jennifer's face as she realized what she was looking at, seeing confusion give way to recognition, and then to panic as she understood that her secret had been exposed. "How long has this been going on?" Michael asked, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. Jennifer stared at the photographs without speaking for several minutes, and Michael could see her mind working through possible explanations or denials. But the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss, and she eventually looked up at him with tears in her eyes. 10 years, she said quietly. "It started 10 years ago, when you were traveling so much for work, and I was feeling lonely. David was going through his divorce, and we were spending time together as friends, and it just developed into something more." The admission that the affair had been going on for a decade hit Michael like a physical blow, even though he had already seen evidence of the timeline in the hidden folder. Hearing Jennifer confirm that she had been deceiving him for 2/3 of their marriage made the betrayal feel even more complete. "Are Lucas and Sophia David's children?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer from the birth certificates he had found. Jennifer nodded without speaking, tears now streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I never meant for you to find out like this." The conversation that followed lasted until nearly 3 a.m., with Jennifer providing details that filled in gaps in the story Michael had pieced together from the hidden folder. She described how the affair had begun during a period when Michael was working on a major project that required frequent travel, leaving her alone with 8-year-old Emma for weeks at a time. David had been recently divorced and struggling with loneliness, and they had begun spending time together as friends who were both dealing with relationship challenges. The physical affair had developed gradually over several months, but the emotional affair had been immediate and intense. Jennifer described feeling understood and appreciated by David in ways that she hadn't experienced with Michael in years. She felt that Michael was so focused on his career success that he had stopped paying attention to her needs and interests, while David was going through his own relationship crisis and was eager to connect with someone who understood his situation. Jennifer's decision to continue the affair for years rather than ending her marriage had been motivated by a combination of factors: fear of the financial consequences of divorce, concern about the impact on Emma, and uncertainty about whether David would be willing to commit to a permanent relationship with her. She had convinced herself that maintaining both relationships was preferable to the disruption and pain that would result from choosing between them. The pregnancies that resulted in Lucas and Sophia had been unplanned but welcome, according to Jennifer. She and David had discussed the possibility that he might be the father, but they had decided not to pursue paternity testing because they were both committed to maintaining their double lives. Jennifer had handled the birth certificate paperwork, specifically to ensure that David would have legal parental rights, while allowing Michael to believe that he was the biological father. Jennifer's explanation of her motivations and decision-making process revealed a level of selfishness and manipulation that Michael had never suspected. She had prioritized her own emotional and financial security over honesty, integrity, and Michael's right to make informed decisions about his own life. She had systematically deceived him about the most fundamental aspects of their relationship, while accepting his financial support, emotional investment, and parental care for children that weren't biologically his. But Jennifer's most devastating admission was that she and David had never intended to end their deception. They had discussed the possibility of divorcing their respective spouses and creating a legitimate relationship, but they had concluded that the benefits of their current arrangement outweighed the costs. Jennifer got financial security and social respectability from her marriage to Michael, while also getting emotional and physical fulfillment from her relationship with David. David got the benefits of fatherhood and a romantic relationship, without the legal obligations and financial responsibilities that would come with marriage and official paternity. Michael realized that if he hadn't accidentally discovered the hidden folder, Jennifer and David might have continued their deception indefinitely. They had become skilled at managing the logistics of their double lives, and they apparently felt no urgency to resolve the unsustainable nature of their situation. When Michael asked Jennifer what she wanted to happen next, her response revealed that she still hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of her betrayal or its implications for their marriage. She suggested that they could work through the situation with couples therapy, that Michael could learn to accept David's role in their family, and that they could find a way to continue their relationship with modified expectations and boundaries. Jennifer's suggestion that Michael should simply accept being deceived and manipulated for a decade, while sharing his wife and children with his best friend, demonstrated a level of entitlement and lack of accountability that ended any possibility of reconciliation. Michael realized that Jennifer fundamentally didn't understand why her actions were unacceptable, and she was still prioritizing her own comfort and convenience over his rights and dignity. The conversation ended with Michael informing Jennifer that the marriage was over and that he would be consulting with a divorce attorney the following day. He told her that she needed to inform David that their secret had been discovered and that Michael would be speaking with him directly within the next few days. He also explained that he would be telling Emma about the situation in an age-appropriate way, because she deserved to understand why her family was about to change dramatically. Jennifer's response to Michael's decision was a mixture of panic, anger, and continued attempts at manipulation. She alternated between apologizing for her deception, blaming Michael for working too much and not paying enough attention to her needs, and warning him about the consequences of divorce for their family's financial security and social standing. But the most painful part of Jennifer's response was her apparent belief that Michael was overreacting to her betrayal. She seemed genuinely surprised that he wasn't willing to consider continuing their marriage with the knowledge that she had been having an affair with his best friend for 10 years, and that 2 of their children were biologically David's offspring. Her inability to understand why these revelations were relationship-ending confirmed Michael's growing realization that the person he thought he'd been married to for 15 years had never actually existed. The next morning, Michael called David and asked him to meet for coffee, without explaining the reason for the meeting. Michael had decided that David deserved to know that their secret had been discovered, but he also wanted to hear David's perspective on their decade-long deception before making final decisions about how to handle the situation. The meeting with David took place at a coffee shop where they had met countless times over the years to discuss work, family, and life in general. Michael watched David's face as he placed the same photographs and documents on the table that he had shown Jennifer the night before, and he saw the same progression of emotions: confusion, recognition, and panic. David's initial response was to deny that the affair was ongoing, claiming that he and Jennifer had had a brief relationship years earlier, but had ended it and remained friends. But when Michael showed him the recent correspondence and photographs, David realized that denial wasn't possible and switched to justification and blame. According to David, the affair had been Jennifer's idea, and she had pursued him during his vulnerable period following his divorce. He claimed that he had tried to end the relationship multiple times, but that Jennifer had convinced him to continue it by arguing that Michael was neglecting her, and that their affair wasn't hurting anyone because Michael didn't know about it. David's version of events painted him as a reluctant participant who had been manipulated by Jennifer into maintaining a relationship that he knew was wrong. But his explanation was contradicted by the love letters Michael had found, which showed David expressing deep emotional commitment to Jennifer and discussing their future together. When Michael confronted David about the paternity of Lucas and Sophia, David admitted that he believed the children were his biological offspring, but he claimed that the birth certificate documentation had been Jennifer's idea and that he had been reluctant to participate in that level of deception. He said that he wanted to tell Michael the truth about the children's paternity, but Jennifer had convinced him that it would be cruel and destructive to reveal information that couldn't change anything about their family situation. David's attempts to minimize his role in the deception and shift blame to Jennifer revealed the same lack of accountability that Michael had seen in Jennifer's response to being confronted. Both of them seemed more concerned with protecting themselves from consequences than with acknowledging the harm they had caused or taking responsibility for their choices. But David's most shocking statement came when he tried to justify continuing the affair by arguing that it had actually benefited Michael. According to David, Jennifer had been happier and more content in her marriage because the affair was meeting her emotional needs, which had made her a better wife and mother. David claimed that Michael had been the beneficiary of Jennifer's improved mood and stability, even though he didn't know the reason for the change. This argument demonstrated such a complete lack of understanding about consent, honesty, and basic human dignity that Michael realized there was no possibility of salvaging his friendship with David. David apparently believed that deceiving Michael was acceptable as long as the deception made Michael's life more pleasant, which showed a fundamental disrespect for Michael's right to make informed decisions about his own relationships and life. The conversation with David lasted for over 2 hours, but it failed to provide Michael with the closure or understanding he had hoped to gain. Instead, it confirmed that both Jennifer and David were committed to protecting themselves rather than acknowledging the magnitude of the betrayal or its impact on Michael's life. When Michael asked David what he wanted to happen next, David suggested that they could find a way to continue their relationship with full transparency, now that the secret was out in the open. He proposed that Michael could accept the situation as it was, with Jennifer maintaining relationships with both men, and that they could all work together to co-parent the children in an unconventional but honest arrangement. David's suggestion that Michael should simply accept being part of a polygamous relationship that he had never agreed to demonstrated the same level of entitlement and lack of empathy that Jennifer had shown. Neither of them seemed to understand that their betrayal had fundamentally changed their relationships with Michael, and that trust, once broken so completely, could not be simply restored through new agreements or arrangements. Michael left the coffee shop meeting with David feeling even more isolated and devastated than he had before. The two people who had been closest to him for years had revealed themselves to be fundamentally different from who he thought they were, and they seemed incapable of understanding why their actions had been so harmful. Over the next several weeks, Michael began the process of rebuilding his life from the ground up. He consulted with a divorce attorney who specialized in complex cases involving paternity issues and discovered that his situation, while emotionally devastating, was not legally unusual. Jennifer would be entitled to significant financial support during and after the divorce, but Michael would have no ongoing obligations to Lucas and Sophia, since they were not his biological children. The divorce proceedings revealed additional layers of deception that Michael had not previously discovered. Jennifer and David had been maintaining a joint bank account for over 5 years, funded partly by money that Jennifer had diverted from a household budget that Michael provided. They had taken several trips together that had been funded by money that Jennifer had claimed was for family expenses or personal necessities. Most painfully, Michael discovered that Jennifer and David had been making plans for a future together that involved Michael's continued financial support for Jennifer, while David took over the day-to-day parental responsibilities for all three children. They had apparently viewed Michael as a reliable source of income and stability who could be kept in the dark indefinitely while they pursued their relationship and raised their family together. The custody arrangements for Emma became complicated because she was Michael's biological daughter, but she had been living in a household where David was a constant presence and where Lucas and Sophia were her half-siblings. Emma, now 8 years old, was confused and upset about the changes in her family situation, and she struggled to understand why David would no longer be part of their daily lives. Michael's relationship with Lucas and Sophia became even more complex and heartbreaking. Despite learning that they were not his biological children, he had developed deep emotional bonds with them over 4 years of daily care and involvement. He had been present for their first words, first steps, and countless moments of growth and development. He had stayed up with them during illnesses, taught them to ride tricycles, read them bedtime stories, and provided the kind of consistent paternal care that creates lasting emotional connections. But legally, Michael had no right to continue his relationship with Lucas and Sophia, and Jennifer and David made it clear that they did not want him to remain involved in the children's lives. They argued that his continued presence would be confusing for the children and would interfere with their ability to create a stable family unit. The loss of his relationship with Lucas and Sophia was, in many ways, more devastating than the end of his marriage or the destruction of his friendship with David. Michael had to grieve not just the betrayal of the adults in his life, but also the forced separation from children he loved as deeply as any biological parent could love their offspring. The emotional toll of discovering such extensive deception while simultaneously losing his family and closest friendship led Michael into a period of severe depression and anxiety. He took a leave of absence from his job, began seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and betrayal, and struggled to understand how he could have been so completely deceived by people he had trusted implicitly. The therapy process helped Michael recognize that he had not been naive or foolish in trusting Jennifer and David. They had been skilled at deception because they had years of practice, and they had been motivated to maintain their lives because they were benefiting from the arrangement they had created. Michael's willingness to trust the people closest to him had been a strength, not a weakness, and the fault lay entirely with those who had chosen to abuse that trust. But therapy also helped Michael understand that recovering from such profound betrayal would require more than just processing his anger and grief. He would need to rebuild his sense of identity, his ability to trust others, and his understanding of what he wanted from relationships and family life moving forward. The divorce was finalized 8 months after Michael's discovery of the affair, and the financial settlement reflected the complexity of their situation. Jennifer received spousal support and retained ownership of their house, while Michael kept most of his retirement savings and investments. The custody arrangement gave Michael primary custody of Emma, with Jennifer having visitation rights that were complicated by her decision to move in with David immediately after the divorce was finalized. A year after discovering betrayal, Michael was living in a small apartment across town, sharing custody of Emma with Jennifer, and working to establish a new identity as a single father and divorced man. The process of rebuilding his life had been more difficult than he had anticipated, partly because the betrayal had been so complete, and partly because the consequences had extended to his relationship with his children and his ability to trust others. But Michael also discovered reserves of strength and resilience that he hadn't known he possessed. The experience of losing everything he had thought was secure and stable had taught him that he could survive much more than he had believed possible, and it had clarified his values and priorities in ways that had been impossible before the crisis. Michael's relationship with Emma had actually grown stronger through the ordeal, partly because she had seen him handle the situation with integrity and grace, and partly because their shared experience of family disruption had created new bonds between them. Emma had initially been angry with Michael for breaking up the family, but as she grew older and understood more about the situation, she developed deep respect for her father's honesty and resilience. The most unexpected aspect of Michael's recovery was his eventual ability to forgive Jennifer and David, not because their actions were acceptable, but because carrying anger and resentment was preventing him from moving forward with his own life. Forgiveness, Michael learned, was something he did for himself rather than something he granted to people who had wronged him. 2 years after the divorce, Michael met Sarah, a divorced mother too who understood the challenges of rebuilding trust after betrayal. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, with both of them committed to the kind of honesty and transparency that had been missing from their previous marriages. Michael's experience with deception had taught him to value authentic communication and mutual respect in ways that he had taken for granted during his marriage to Jennifer. Michael never attempted to reestablish relationships with Lucas and Sophia, recognizing that their best interests were served by stability with Jennifer and David rather than confusion about parental roles. But he often thought about them and hoped that they were growing up in an environment where honesty and integrity were valued more highly than they had been during the years when their family life was built on elaborate deceptions. 3 years after discovering the affair, Michael received an unexpected phone call from David, who wanted to apologize for his role in the betrayal and express regret about the way their friendship had ended. David's call came during a period when his relationship with Jennifer was struggling, and he was apparently seeking some form of absolution or closure from Michael. Michael listened to David's apology with a mixture of curiosity and detachment. David spoke about the guilt he had carried since their secret was exposed, the difficulties he had experienced in his relationship with Jennifer once they were living together openly, and his regret about losing the friendship that had been so important to him for most of his life. But David's apology still contained the same self-serving elements that had characterized his initial response to being confronted. He continued to minimize his role in the deception, suggesting that he had been swept up in a situation that Jennifer had initiated and controlled. He spoke about missing Michael's friendship as if the betrayal had been an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a deliberate choice to deceive and manipulate someone who had trusted him completely. Michael's response to David's call surprised even himself. Instead of anger or bitterness, he felt primarily sadness of friendship they had lost, for the time that had been wasted on lies, and for David's apparent inability to understand the magnitude of what he had done. Michael thanked David for calling, wished him well, but made it clear that their friendship could not be restored. "I've forgiven you," Michael told David during their final conversation, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending that what happened was acceptable. You and Jennifer made choices that destroyed our friendship and my family, and those choices have consequences that can't be undone by apologies or regret." The phone call with David provided Michael with a sense of closure that he hadn't realized he needed. It confirmed his decision to move forward with his life rather than dwelling on betrayal, and it reinforced his understanding that some relationships, once broken by fundamental dishonesty, cannot and should not be repaired. For years after discovering the affair, Michael's life had stabilized in ways he couldn't have imagined during the darkest period following the revelation. He had been promoted to senior partner at his architecture firm, partly because his colleagues had been impressed by his professionalism and resilience during his personal crisis. His relationship with Sarah had evolved into a committed partnership based on mutual respect and transparent communication, and they were discussing marriage and the possibility of blending their families. Emma, now 12 years old, had adjusted well to the changes in her family structure and maintained healthy relationships with both of her parents. She spent weekends with Michael and Sarah, and she had developed a close relationship with Sarah's children that enriched all of their lives. Emma's experience with family disruption had made her mature beyond her years, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about resilience, integrity, and the importance of honest relationships. Michael had also developed new friendships with people who shared his values and understood the importance of trust in relationships. His experience with betrayal had made him more selective about the people he allowed into his inner circle, but it had also made him more appreciative of genuine friendship and authentic connection when he found it. The most significant change in Michael's life was a perspective on success and happiness. Before discovering the affair, he had measured his life primarily in terms of external achievements, career advancement, financial security, social status, and the appearance of a perfect family. The betrayal had forced him to recognize that none of those external markers of success had any meaning if they were built on deceptions and false relationships. Michael's new understanding of success was based on internal measures of integrity, authenticity, and meaningful connection with others. He had learned to value honesty over harmony, truth over comfort, and genuine relationships over convenient arrangements. The experience of losing everything that had seemed secure had taught him that the only real security came from living according to his values and surrounding himself with people who shared those values. 5 years after the discovery that had changed his life, Michael was invited to speak at a support group for people who had experienced betrayal in their marriages and close relationships. He had initially been reluctant to share his story publicly, but he had come to understand that his experience could provide hope and guidance for others who were struggling with similar situations. "The betrayal I experienced was devastating," Michael told the support group audience, "but also taught me things about myself, about relationships, and about what really matters that I couldn't have learned any other way. I wouldn't choose to go through that experience again, but I also wouldn't trade the person I've become as a result of surviving it." Michael's message to others who had experienced similar betrayals was that recovery was possible, but it required a willingness to rebuild their lives from the ground up rather than trying to repair what had been damaged beyond redemption. He emphasized the importance of professional counseling, supportive friendships, and most importantly, the decision to prioritize truth over comfort in all future relationships. "The people who betrayed me taught me that some individuals are capable of elaborate deception and manipulation," Michael explained to the group. "But they also taught me to recognize and appreciate people who are genuinely honest, loyal, and trustworthy. I have better relationships now than I had before the betrayal, because I understand what real integrity looks like, and I refuse to accept anything less." The support group presentation led to additional speaking opportunities, and Michael eventually became a volunteer counselor for men who had experienced infidelity and betrayal in their marriages. His combination of personal experience and emotional recovery made him uniquely qualified to help others navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives after discovering that their closest relationships had been built on lies. Michael's work with other betrayal survivors also helped him understand that his experience, while uniquely painful in its details, was part of a broader pattern of deception and manipulation that affected many families. He learned about the psychological and social factors that enabled some people to maintain elaborate lies for years, while others remained trusting and unaware of the deception occurring around them. But Michael also learned that recovery from betrayal was not just about surviving the immediate crisis. It was about using the experience to develop stronger values, better boundaries, and more authentic relationships moving forward. The men he counseled who recovered most successfully were those who used their betrayal experiences as catalysts for positive change rather than allowing them to become sources of permanent bitterness or cynicism. 7 years after discovering Jennifer and David's decade-long affair, Michael married Sarah in a small ceremony attended by their children, close friends, and family members who had supported them through their respective divorces and recoveries. The wedding was a celebration not just of their love for each other, but their shared commitment to building a relationship based on honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. Emma, now 15 years old, served as Michael's best woman at the wedding, a role that reflected their strong father-daughter bond and her maturity in understanding adult relationships. Sarah's children, who had come to regard Michael as a stepfather figure, participated in the ceremony as well, creating a moment of family unity that felt authentic and meaningful rather than performed or artificial. The wedding was deliberately different from Michael's first marriage to Jennifer, with emphasis on intimate celebration rather than elaborate display. Michael and Sarah had chosen to prioritize substance over appearance, meaningful traditions over expensive ceremonies, and authentic emotion over social expectations. During their wedding vows, Michael spoke about the lessons he had learned about love, trust, and commitment through his experience with betrayal and recovery. "I promise to be honest with you even when honesty is difficult," he said to Sarah, "to respect your right to know the truth about our relationship, and to never take your trust for granted." Sarah's vows included similar commitments to transparency and authenticity, reflecting their shared understanding that their relationship's strength would come from their willingness to be vulnerable and truthful with each other rather than from their ability to maintain comfortable illusions. If you made it all the way here, it means this story truly held you. So don't leave without showing some love. Hit like, subscribe to stay with us, and drop a comment. I'll be here, reading every word you share. The marriage between Michael and Sarah proved to be everything that Michael's first marriage had pretended to be, a genuine partnership between equals who supported each other's growth, communicated openly about difficulties, and shared responsibility for creating a family environment based on honesty and mutual respect. 8 years after betrayal, Michael received a Christmas card from Jennifer that included photos of Lucas and Sophia, now 12 years old. Jennifer had written a brief note apologizing once again for the pain she had caused and expressing hope that Michael was happy in his new life. She mentioned that Lucas and Sophia sometimes asked about Uncle Michael and wondered whether they might be able to see him again someday. Michael looked at the photos of Lucas and Sophia, children who bore no physical resemblance to him, but whom he had loved deeply during their early years, and felt a mixture of sadness and peace. They were growing up to be beautiful, healthy children who appeared happy and well cared for in their life with Jennifer and David. Michael was glad to see that they were thriving, but he also recognized that they belonged to a chapter of his life that was permanently closed. Michael wrote a brief response to Jennifer's Christmas card, thanking her for the update about the children, and expressing his hope that they were doing well. But he also made it clear that he did not want to reestablish contact with Lucas and Sophia, recognizing that such contact would be confusing for them and potentially disruptive to the stability they had found with Jennifer and David. "I will always care about Lucas and Sophia's well-being," Michael wrote to Jennifer, "but I understand that their best interests are served by maintaining the family structure you and David have created for them. I wish all of you happiness and success in your lives." The exchange of Christmas cards provided a sense of final closure to the most painful chapter of Michael's life. He had been able to express continued care for children he had loved while also maintaining the boundaries necessary for his own emotional health and their family stability. 10 years after discovering the affair that destroyed his first marriage and closest friendship, Michael was living a life that bore no resemblance to his existence before the betrayal, but that was infinitely more authentic and satisfying than what he had lost. He had learned that the appearance of perfect relationships meant nothing if those relationships were built on deception, and that imperfect but honest relationships were far more valuable than elaborate facades maintained through lies. Michael's experience had taught him that trust, once broken completely, could not be repaired, but that the capacity to trust again could be developed through careful attention to character, consistency, and authentic communication. His marriage to Sarah and his relationships with their blended family were proof that it was possible to build meaningful connections even after experiencing profound betrayal. The man who had discovered his best friend and wife's 10-year secret had learned that the most devastating losses could become a foundation for the most meaningful gains, and that sometimes the destruction of everything you thought you wanted was necessary to discover what you actually needed. Michael's story became a testament to the human capacity for resilience, growth, and the creation of authentic happiness, even in the aftermath of unimaginable betrayal. His journey from devastation to renewal had shown that while some people are capable of elaborate deception and manipulation, others are committed to honesty, integrity, and genuine love. The key to recovery was learning to recognize the difference and having the courage to accept only authentic relationships while walking away from anything that required him to compromise his values or accept less than he deserved. Michael's life had been forever changed by the betrayal he discovered, but it had been changed for the better. Not because the betrayal was positive, but because his response to it had led him to discover his own strength, clarify his values, and build relationships based on truth rather than illusion. He had learned that real love required real honesty, and that the most beautiful life was one lived in alignment with integrity rather than in service to comfortable lies.